So welcome again to Cherry Red TV and Conscious TV. My name is Iain McNay and my guest today is Arthur Brown, and we're doing a part 2 of the Arthur Brown story. And if you haven't seen part 1, you need to seek it out somewhere. And Arthur, of course, is so influential because his music has influenced and his appearance has influenced Ozzy Osbourne, Peter Gabriel, Alice Cooper, Iron Maiden, Iggy Pop, Sex Pistols, New York Dolls, The Clash, Primal Scream, the Buzzcocks, just to name a few. He really is. It's very important what he did, so much ahead of his time. We covered in the first half, obviously, a lot of your musical adventures, but also the spiritual side of your journey. And we just got to the point where you were getting involved in the Gurdjieff community with JG Bennett, which I think was it Gloucestershire somewhere? And I'm really interested in hearing about the movements there, which is, anyone that knows about Gurdjieff knows that he had these almost impossible movements with music from De Hartmann. So just talk about that a bit.
Yeah, Gurdjieff himself was an accomplished accordionist who liked to improvise and was very interested in the power of music and the power of dance. And so he took the trouble to study this with various people. And many people feel that he was an outreach of the Saruman Brotherhood, who were, as their history supposedly goes, they were there right at the beginning when the first separations in humanity occurred. And so when one of the lots of people who had gone out reached a crisis point, this brotherhood would send people out to remind them what they were really about and what the root of their culture was. And a lot of it was contained in the movements, the gestures, what would be mudra in Indian, but these were moving mudra, if you like. They were a language, and they involved both all the centers, intellectual center, the feeling center, the moving center. If you were doing a movement, first of all, the body had to learn it. So a very simple rhythm would be laid down, and this might be, in the case of the school, people who'd never, ever in their lives moved to music. And so the first movement was very simple. It was just learning to do standing, and then you'd do it by shifting the feet forwards and backwards. And then gradually from there you'd build up, and the body would learn to listen, and it would develop a memory. Then you'd have the hands coming in, and the other limbs, and so soon you would have the outer shell of certain forms where that one hand might start, but when it got down to here, this one did, and so you were chasing the other arm with the same movement, and the legs were doing their own journey. So that was quite complex. But then you involved the feeling center, and the feeling center you might place hope, for instance, in this hand, and then you might have faith in that thigh, and you move them round perhaps. But there were definite places at different times in the movements where they had to be in a certain place.
So you had yourself a certain image or feeling for hope and faith and other...
They were drawn in from our work in the morning. When we got up, we would do the morning exercise, which was a form of deep concentration around certain subjects and themes, and faith, hope, wish were all things that we and they would be carried on as topics through the work day, for instance, so that you did have a connection with those, and there was something very real went in gradually. Your feeling of wish was not, I'm wishing for this or that. It was just, what is wish by itself? The feeling of it. And so then you'd learn how to put those in their place to these movements, which were quite complex for the body. And then the intellectual center was A, remembering the sequences, B, remembering the actual, you visually you'd run through it before you did it in your mind. So there was a visual picture of the sequence going all the way. And of course, when you started, it wasn't something you could do, but gradually you learned how to do that as well. So you had eventually all the systems. You had your mind, your body, your feelings, and then there was the urge towards love of the heart. And so every faculty was used, and then you would, because they were all engaged, your attention would then be open to what did not get contained in the forms themselves. It was the formlessness.
I'm amazed there's space for the formlessness to appear, because all your mental effort is tied up. But what you're saying is there was space for something else to appear.
But not in the mind.
Okay.
That was the point. The mind was fully occupied.
Yes.
The feelings are fully occupied. The body's fully occupied.
Yeah.
What then? And
what came up for you then?
Well, it was funny. The first time what Bennett did was said, I would like you, when I had my first meeting with him, I'd like you to go next week to London and see the demonstration of the movements. And I knew, actually at that point, nothing. I'd had that five-page look at Gurdjieff's books, but I knew nothing about it all. So I went to the movements demonstration, and these were students who had not been doing it very long, but the forms themselves are living entities. And so what happened to me was everything got wiped away, and there I was, formless. And so I thought, oh, that's it then. That's what I want to do. And that led to going on his course. And there are many people in the class who say all the other realms of the teachings of Gurdjieff support the movements, because it's in the movements, the dances, that everything is contained.
And I gather that Robert Fripp came along a few months later and joined the course there. So you had a fellow musician there.
Yeah, well, he joined the year after. I'd already left.
Okay.
But yeah, he went through that and learned all of that.
Yeah.
And then put his own form of that into, the League of Gentlemen, the crafty guitarists.
So that really influenced his music.
Yes, and what he felt he could do with his music. It's one thing playing music, it's another getting other people playing it in a way that is not governed by the usual way you teach music.
And how did you feel the Gurdjieff work to influence your music?
Well, because for me it was a taste of formlessness that came, and that always informed whatever I did afterwards with the movements. I already knew that that's where it was going to end up, but you have to fill in.
So in a way your music had already been influenced by the formlessness, as we discussed in part one, and this was more of a kind of a clarification for you.
yeah, and how could it spread into daily life?
Yes.
You know, and kind of listening to music in a different way, listening to the kind of deep voices of music.
Yes.
And you know, with I'd had a kind of experience in America where I saw what I would have described. I remember I was interviewed, and the guy said, "Well, then, so what happened with you?" And I said, "Well, I saw God," and he said, "Oh, really? What does he look like?" I said, "Well, no, I'm not meaning it that way." I said, I realized that I am God. And he said, "Well, that's all very well for you, but what about the rest of us?" So, but it was kind of a picture of everything laid out, all the hierarchies of existence, all the formation of life and planets and everything. I saw it all, and it was all inside. So that was what Bennett was able to say to me. Oh, that is one of the things he said is a certain level of existence on which all matter is one. And of course now we've got the Big Bang, and it comes from the primal moment. Well, but at that time that was not current. And so that aspect of he was able to explain to me. And I wanted to know how I, as a human being, as a person, could live in a way that kind of honoured that. You know what I mean? That I could tell already that it wasn't enough to be intellectual about it and to know about it.
Yeah.
Because you can know about it and live in the most terrible way. So it was a question of finding a way to... What happened was, when I was asked those questions in the room that I told you about last time, when some of the fans were asking about life and death and its meaning, I realized I didn't know. Now, what I decided was I'd have to go out and find out.
Mm.
And that's what I did. I went into a lot of the world's traditions, studied with them, practiced them, and came across all sorts of remarkable experiences. But in my case, it wasn't until I met this woman in Portugal that Muji knows quite well. She's called Ganga Daku. She was married to Papaji, the great Indian sage.
Papaji, well, yeah.
And what I really loved about her, she once said to me, I love pottering around in my garden, playing with my grandchildren. That's enough.
Yes.
And she said, but if someone comes and asks me a question about all this, about freedom, I can't not answer.
Yes.
So it's like not going out to be a teacher. Because
but when
then,
called, the response is there somehow.
And then that frees you up to respond to everything in the moment that life brings you.
Yes.
And you don't have to be a teacher.
Yeah. There's a quote I wanted to read, which I just, again, really liked. It's from Polly Marshall's book, which I did show at the beginning of part one. Around this time, I think it's around this time, and it was a quote from you, obviously. Suddenly, I was consciousness listening to me. I heard the beginning of everything. It sounded like a huge bell. Just before that, I had voices, sounding like Om. I knew that everyone heard it differently, and then that on different levels of consciousness, the sound was different. I had in the meditation entered the bliss body. It has in the contemplation of the sound, become apparent that the bliss body was the balance of yin and yang. The movement of these two from the original hum sound introduces all subsequent sounds.
Mm-hmm.
That's a very deep, it's a very deep realisation on many levels, including the origins of music.
Yes, yes. It was a kind of moment of absolute stillness, if you like, for me then. And, you know, those moments as such come and go, and then the fruit of them remains. And I remember reading one man's feeling. He said, because it was like that, then when the first laws were given to the human kind by one of them, they were sung.
They were
sung.
They were sung.
Because the vibration, you know, when you sing, oh, it has a little more resonance than usually speech, which is broken up into.
Yeah. Progressing on the musical side, you got a call from Bob Calvert one day, had the Hawkwind connections, and you ended up singing on the Captain Lockheed and the Starfighters album, which is a legendary album for many people.
Yeah. Oh, Robert, he was a great poet and a wild man and a troubled man as well. And we used to meet occasionally and just have fun and discuss things. So when he came up with his album, it was natural we would do something together. And yeah, actually in our current band, Angel, used to know Robert. And she still talks about him all the time.
And this again kind of confirmed a kind of on-off connection with Hawkwind, and you sang guest vocals for Hawkwind, didn't you, for gigs, and I think you were even on some tracks on a couple of the albums.
Yeah, I did. I was the lead vocalist for about 6 months.
Yes, yeah.
And yeah, did several albums. One of the track was a conversation with Robert Calvert. I was also a good friend with Viv Stanshall.
Yes.
And of course they both had red hair. They both committed themselves to Banstead Mental Home. And they both came to my house in Puddletown a year apart, not having anything to do with each other. Both came with their hair shorn, but just growing again, so a little red halo, black leather suits with a briefcase. And they were both in the same condition. They were both very speedy. Mm. And so, about 9 months later, about a year later, I got a call from Viv Stanshall's wife saying, Viv's been in bed for 4 months and he won't move. Can you help? So I said, yeah, I'm going to think of something. I thought, wow, maybe he'd like to meet a kindred spirit of his own, Bob Calvert. So I called up Bob, and he said, yeah, I'll come round. So we arrived at Viv's house, and his wife said, look, there's only room for one in the bedroom. I said, well, Robert, I brought you to introduce you to Viv, so why don't you go up? So he went up, and he lasted about 35 seconds. We heard the window go out. Bob came tearing down the stairs. Viv, in his pyjamas, came running after him, chased him out down the path, and that got Viv out of bed.
It worked. Not the way you thought it would, but it worked. Yeah. Yeah. And you did. We can't really go into detail, but you did around this time again. You sang on Tommy, the movie. You were the priest, weren't you? And of course that had Eric Clapton there, Tina Turner, Elton John, Oliver Reed. So that, again, another amazing experience. And you also, one of my favourite albums of all time, Alan Parsons, Tales of Mystery and Imagination. That must have been a real adventure too.
Yeah, that was a very strange one, because he sent me some lyrics with a basic track. So, and I got those, I think, the night before. So I just went over them and was like, oh. And then we went in, and it was, as I recall, morning. It was an odd time to, and so and he said, right, on comes the track, go, basically. And so I just let rip with it, and two takes, and it was gone, you know.
Yeah.
It was an easy track to do, because I kind of had a feeling for it.
Yes. So really had that all come because of fire, or do you think a contribution was the fact that over the years, musically, you'd really stayed with what was authentic for you?
I think it was a combination of those two.
Yes.
Also, you know, the fact that, say, with Alan Parsons, I was we used to play a lot with the Floyd, and there was one point where their management were applied for the government grant, and we were going to do a big drama together. So I'd be the vocalist, and the Floyd were going to pay it. And eventually, it ended up as The Wall. So they couldn't get the funding. But there was already that link, if you like, with the Floyd, and therefore with Alan Parsons in that way.
And one thing that really interests me was that, again, it was in Polly's book, that you went to Israel, and you ended up. You went there because you wanted to work with injured soldiers. It's quite brave. You ended up on the front line, and you sang to them, and that was helping to heal them, which of course sounds far out, but we expect nothing less from you, really. So how did all that work then? Were you really singing to injured soldiers?
Yeah, it was a woman called Golden. She had a thing called Artists for Israel. As far as I was concerned, I was singing to not particularly, Israeli people, but just wounded soldiers.
Yes.
And so they had, PJ Proby had gone out, Peter and Gordon. That's right, yeah. And so I just thought, yeah, okay, I can do that. And I took my guitar, and she had, Mrs. Golden, I was staying in their house. I rented a little property there. And she used to have delegations coming in, and my job was to sit there, listen to their conversation at dinner, and make up improvised pieces about it. And she's heard that and said, well, why don't you go and do this out in Israel for the soldiers? I said, great. You know, I like the idea of healing people. So we got out there, and that in itself is an amazing story, but I'll cut it short. Eventually, we went round some of I was in a big hotel in, and it was every morning they'd come in with a little gold cup with a rose in it, and we would go around the hospitals. There was a woman dancer that they teamed me up with, and played to these people who had no arms and legs, and I was just amazed with how, you know, you'd come in to sit down, play something, and somebody who'd just come back in the most terrible condition would smile at you and say, good morning, oh, thank you for coming. And then I did take about 10 songs with me, but a lot of it was the improvised stuff. And sometimes it had a very strange effect. Like one guy, I was singing to him, and he started to get really angry. And it was getting out of hand, actually. So I thought, I wonder what I can do for him. So I moved it round so that it was in the what's they call, the land of promise. And then he kind of stopped and smiled and woke up, and he realised that those guys are right on the edge, and you've only just to say a slight wrong thing. So that put me really on my guard as far as what I would, how I would, and I was much more attentive to how they were feeling after that. And but I was still thinking, well, I thought I was coming to soldiers in the battlefront. So that afternoon, I got a call from the general. He said, Mr. Brown, we're very happy you came here. And he said, how's it going? I said, oh, it's pretty fantastic. You know, I've got the Flash Hotel and all of this, and I've been doing some hospital work. It's really good. But it's not what I thought it was going to be. And he said, oh, what was that? And I said, well, I was going to be in the front line, I thought. He said, oh, really? And then we talked a little bit. Next morning, at about 11 o'clock, I got a call. And he said, morning, Mr. Brown. I said, good morning. He said, your wish is granted. You're flying to the front line this afternoon. So that was it. We got down there, and they don't drink. But I was met with a vodka party in the tent, and decided that I was going to go and sit on the front line, and I was going to stop this war by singing. So I marched out to the front line with my guitar between the troops, and
you were in between the Palestinians and the Israelis.
Yeah, I was going right out, and I suddenly thought, oh, bullet. Maybe they won't stop just because I'm singing. So I turned around and went back. And then the next days, I was around the guys in the front. I gave a concert to the soldiers on the front, and the stage was sandbags, and they were sitting on sandbags. And there was a microphone, and I did a concert with a band that they had put together from the soldiers. We just did whatever we could. Yeah. But I must say, at that time, you see, as I said, I wasn't in there for supporting the Israeli cause against the Palestinians. And at the time, I was also involved with reading Ibn Arabi, who, along with Rumi and the other great authors of that tradition, were expounding the mystical view of God of the Islamic people. And so the interviewer, I had to do an interview, and the interviewer, I'd just come off the sandbanks, got into the little box where the guy was, and he gave me the mic, and he said, well then, Mr. Brown, that was a very good concert. We're very happy to have you here. Tell me, what have you been doing today? And of course, I wasn't being provocative. I was just in a case of being very open after the concert. I said, I've been reading Arabic philosophy. And the interviewer stopped dead instantly. And we're not very pleased with that. But I just felt, well, I'm not here trying to proselytize for one side or the other. So that was the...
And did you feel, what interests me is this And I know we might have to end up doing a part 3 actually, because I know our time is finite here. But I know later on you were doing songs for individual. You trained as a psychotherapist, and you were doing songs for individual clients. Did you feel at this stage that your voice had a healing quality, in terms of it could actually help physically or emotionally heal a soldier?
Well, while I was in the place where I studied Ibn Arabi, one of the things I did was to sing people what I could tell them of their life and the state of that they were in. And so I would just start and do it. And then some of them would come and say, well, I've got this or that problem. And I would sing, I would listen as they were talking and then try and pick up, the subtler energies that are going on that were disrupting them. And then make up images and things like that. So I knew there was something there. And so I felt that, there was something that might be of value to those people. And in actual fact, Mr. Bennett, the Gurdjieff man, had said to me, if you don't do many rock concerts, why don't you go and do it to people in disabled homes, in hospitals and stuff? And I considered what he said, because he said, that energy is what they need. And so I had actually been a visiting kind of health worker with the guitar to the Putney Rehabilitation Centre before that.
Picking out another quote as you talk here from the book, which when you talk about in the early 80s, outlines that you were outlining possibilities of changing the balance of the body with shapes built out of sound. The different architectural structures, such as pyramids, all correspond to different structural arrangements of the mind, which again it connects in with this healing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we, I think, as a culture, we don't pay a lot of attention to that, but there is a kind of objective kind of art, if you like, that speaks to the deeper levels of the human mind and its own structures, which are the same as the structures of the universe. And so if there's a knowledge of it, then it can be used to rebalance the whole of a human being. And that's how, in a different way, some of the sheikhs are able to alter a person's destiny, because it's a whole balance of them with the life forces and the energies around them. And so we have not investigated that very much.
Yeah. We'll come on to that more in part 3 when we record part 3. But I wanted now to just go back to the music side, because sequentially after that, after Israel, you met up with Klaus Schulze from Tangerine Dream, of course, and I think you made 4 albums with him. And that's interesting because he was very much from the improvised electronic music. And you were already had obviously improvised element, but that was sort of merging your rock side more with the electronic side. And I just wondered how that was for you.
Oh, it was very challenging. And I did, Klaus, he liked the kraut rock, which has a very basic rhythm, but he also brought in, Mickey Shreve and Walter Teepold, the cello player, and gradually developed a much more subtle and easily accessible dance rhythm to his music. And some of the sounds he produced were just phenomenal. They would take you to a different place. And I wasn't hearing any of those sounds in normal rock music in those days. It was before the Fairlight came into play, and so it was all done with, you know, patchwork and knobs, and so Klaus had a bank of synthesizers big as the whole back of this room, and when we toured, we did a 40-city tour of Europe, he put a mirror behind it and then sat facing the mirror, so the audience saw him in the mirror. And that was kind of a comment on, because it was the music that he made up, or he and I made up for Dune. And so it was kind of a comment on, you know, the mirror of reality. And he was a very relaxed kind of German in those days. And he, at the same time, had strict regulations about what was to appear in his concert. And so he didn't want, for instance, me to make the audience laugh, didn't want me to dance, and didn't want me to do any Eastern scales.
Any Eastern scales?
Yeah, he had
that was
his
pretty
own
restrictive, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Because you were into dancing, you like Eastern influence.
Well, yeah, it's quite and so it ended up, I was just standing there, and I didn't move or anything. But we got amazing responses, and of course he was coming from his vision of what his music was and what it represented to people. So that's what I helped him to put forward, you know. I thought he was quite amazing.
And that sound that you had there was the beginning of the sound of people like Human League and Gary Newman, Depeche Mode. So again, you were influential about doing something that influenced some really big acts later on.
Yes. Well, it's just a question of, you know, like you said, when I did The Crazy World, I was lucky to meet Vincent and Dracian, actually.
And Vincent was also involved, wasn't he? In that one of the albums
yes,
you made with Klaus too.
Yeah, he was. That was. He'd just come back from a very, very low period.
Yes.
And was on his way back up again.
I'm just looking at my notes here. Also, one of the albums that you did with Klaus, you got the lyrics reading the Bhagavad Gita on the plane. Do you remember that?
Yes.
Yeah. So you took these lyrics out of a book, and then a few hours later, so I wonder what Klaus thought of that.
He loved it.
He loved it. Yeah.
But a lot of our concerts, you know, it was just improvised. We didn't, and we had a kind of basic form as to whether it would go, you know, fast, slow, more intense, less, but the rest of it. And so, you know, particularly when we played in France, I had to sing it in French. In Germany, I could sing it in English because most of them understood English. So it was it was quite a discipline to do that with Klaus.
Yeah.
And we did, I think 3 improvised albums, and the other one with Vincent, which was a very good album.
Yeah.
I did 2 with Vincent under the Klaus Schulze umbrella.
Okay.
The other one was an album called
Speed of Light, I think. And
and that was done with the Frankfurt Symphony Orchestra.
Yeah.
Because Vincent, even though I put him through Klaus Schulze's synthesizer school, came out and said, I hate synthesizers and I'm never going to use one. Yeah. And we got 1 electronic note on the whole album. And and Klaus had to call in the Frankfurt Symphony Orchestra, and it became an orchestral album.
Yeah.
So I had been doing improvising with oh golly, the guy from White Noise, not Klaus Bormann. What's his name?
Don't worry.
It'll come back in a minute.
Don't worry.
But we were playing with the Fairlight, doing lots of stuff with all kinds of. But no, Vincent had to put it back into a classical orchestra.
We need to finish now. We're going to do a part 3, hopefully, at some stage, so we can continue and finish the rest of your story.
Oh.
I want to just mention that many of the albums we talked about, the 3 Kingdom Come albums we talked about, the Crazy World of Arthur Brown album, they're all available actually on CD. You can still get them. I won't go through them all in detail now, but if you look around, you'll find them. And also, so much of the information I got for today's interview comes out of the Polly Marshall book, which, if you're interested in Arthur and his journey, both the musical and spiritual side, I think you'll find a must-read. It does finish in 2005, so we have to find out in the next interview with Arthur also what happened after 2005. So thank you again for coming along and being such a good sport, talking about so many open things with the music side and the spiritual side.
Well, Ian, it's because you put the questions.
Well, it's all stuff that really, really interests me, and that's the whole motivation of it.
Well, thank you for it.
And hopefully I'll see you again for part 3, not too far away.
I hope so.
Maybe you sing us a song then as well.